The emergency room doors burst open with a violent swing. Cameras flashed outside as security struggled to push back reporters desperate for answers. On the stretcher lay Victor Hargrove, a billionaire tycoon known across the globe for his ruthless empire and his iron will. Tonight, none of that mattered. His chest heaved erratically, machines screamed warnings, and panic rippled through the hospital corridors. Every second meant the difference between life and death. Inside the operating room, the chief surgeon, Dr. Randall Pierce, barked orders with the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Everyone stay in your lane. I don't want mistakes." His eyes, sharp and cold, cut toward a young black nurse standing quietly near the tray of instruments. Her name was Ava Johnson. She had been preparing for this moment her entire career, but Pierce sneered at her presence. "You're here to observe, not interfere. Keep your hands to yourself." Ava's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She had heard these words before, felt this disdain 100 times. Yet as she looked at the billionaire gasping on the table, her instincts told her this night would not be like any other. She was about to be tested in ways no one in this room imagined. The hours before the billionaire's arrival had been routine for Ava. She had finished a double shift, checking on patients, adjusting 4 lines, offering quiet words of comfort. She was the kind of nurse families remembered long after discharge, not because of flashy heroics but because she listened, she noticed, she cared. What most people didn't know was that behind her calm presence lay a history few could imagine. Years earlier she had served as a combat medic overseas. She had stopped bleeding in the desert heat, stabilized soldiers under enemy fire, and saved lives with nothing more than grit and improvisation. But in this pristine hospital, those stories didn't matter. To the likes of Dr. Pierce, she was just another nurse who should know her place. That night, whispers had spread fast. "The billionaire is coming here." Every channel is covering it. Staff rushed to prepare the operating theater, as though saving Victor Hargrove was not just a duty but a chance for glory. Pierce strutted through the halls, his white coat flowing behind him like a cape. "This is my moment," he declared. "When the world sees who pulled him back from the brink, they'll know the name Dr. Randall Pierce." The junior staff laughed nervously, clinging to his every word. Ava kept her focus on the equipment, double-checking every clamp, every monitor. She noticed a calibration error in one of the machines and corrected it quietly. No one thanked her. No one even noticed. Yet in her gut, she knew it mattered. When the billionaire's stretcher rolled in, chaos exploded. His breathing was shallow, his pulse faint. Pierce threw on his gloves and began barking commands, his voice growing louder with each order. Ava stepped forward, instinctively preparing the right instruments before he asked, but Pierce slapped the tray aside. "I said stay back. You're not qualified to lead in here." She swallowed the sting, her eyes burning with quiet defiance. She wasn't here for his approval. She was here to keep a man alive. As the monitors wailed and the room buzzed with panic, Ava felt the weight of fate pressing on her shoulders. Something inside whispered that before this night was over, the arrogance of Dr. Pierce would collide with the strength she had carried in silence for far too long. And when that moment came, the whole world would see what they had overlooked. The sterile lights of the operating theater glared down as if they, too, were witnesses to the arrogance on display. Dr. Randall Pierce moved with theatrical confidence, his voice booming across the room. "Scalpel," he demanded, not even glancing at the nurse who handed it to him. He lived for these moments. The spotlight, the whispers of awe from the interns, the unspoken promise that newspapers and TV anchors would chant his name by morning. To him, Victor Hargrove's crisis was not just a medical emergency, it was his stage. Ava Johnson, standing on the side, quietly observed. She had been told, again, to keep her hands folded, to remain in the shadow of the man who thought himself untouchable. But her eyes never stopped moving. Years of combat medicine had taught her to scan, to anticipate, to see the small things others missed. And already she spotted mistakes. A clamp was angled wrong. A monitor had not been reset after calibration. A junior resident's hands trembled so badly that the sterile field was nearly compromised. Ava's chest tightened, but she said nothing. She knew if she spoke, Pierce would ridicule her in front of everyone. In the gallery above, through a pane of glass, Hargrove's family and advisors watched every move. His wife, pale and shaken, gripped the railing. "That's the best surgeon in the state, isn't it?" she whispered to an aide. The aide nodded quickly. "Dr. Pierce has handled dozens of high-profile cases. He won't fail." Their eyes never drifted to Ava. To them she was invisible, just another nurse among dozens. Inside the room, Pierce's impatience grew. "We need more suction. Don't just stand there like statues," he barked at two nurses. His temper, long tolerated because of his reputation, boiled over when stress hit. Ava stepped forward, positioning the equipment before him smoothly, efficiently, like she had done countless times in silence. But instead of gratitude she got a sneer. "Didn't I tell you to stay back? Do you not understand plain English?" The room went cold. A few staff exchanged awkward glances, but none dared intervene. Power silenced conscience. Ava clenched her teeth. She wanted to remind him that English wasn't the only language she spoke, that in dusty tents overseas she had translated pain into survival more times than he could imagine. But she swallowed it. This wasn't about her pride. Not yet. The billionaire's condition worsened. Monitors beeped in irregular rhythms. A nurse read out numbers nervously. Blood pressure dropping. Heart rate unstable. Pierce waved them off with a confidence that seemed almost reckless. "I have it under control. Just follow my lead." But Ava could see the sweat forming on his brow, the subtle tremor in his dominant hand. Something about his movements was sloppy, careless. She felt it deep in her bones. Pierce was making errors. As he worked, Ava noticed he ignored a minor bleed, one that could escalate quickly. Her instinct screamed. She leaned closer to a junior nurse and whispered, "He missed that vein. It needs to be clamped now." The nurse froze, torn between obeying Pierce and trusting Ava. When Pierce turned, his eyes landed on Ava again. "What are you whispering about? If you have something to say, spit it out. Otherwise, keep quiet." His words cut through the air like a whip. Ava straightened her back. "You missed a bleed, doctor. If you don't address it, his pressure will crash." The room held its breath. Pierce's face darkened. "Are you questioning me? A nurse telling me how to operate? This is not a battlefield, Miss Johnson. This is medicine." He leaned in, voice dripping with condescension. "Know your place." The tension was unbearable. Some staff looked down at their shoes, ashamed. Others hid smirks, accustomed to seeing Ava diminished. But the monitors betrayed the truth. Blood pressure was plummeting, just as she had warned. Pierce scrambled to correct it, pretending it was part of his plan all along. Still, his pride wouldn't let him admit she was right. "Increase fluids," he barked, shifting the blame. Ava felt her chest burn with anger, but she forced herself to stay composed. She reminded herself why she was here. Not to win an argument, but to keep a man alive. She thought of the countless soldiers she had saved under enemy fire, men who didn't care about her rank, only about her steady hands. Here in this room the enemy wasn't just the failing body on the table, it was arrogance. Up in the gallery Hargrove's son frowned. "Why does it look like he's struggling?" The aide beside him cleared his throat. "Stress. It's a complicated case, but Dr. Pierce is the best." Still, doubt flickered in the boy's eyes. Back in the OR, Ava moved discreetly, correcting small errors when no one was looking. She adjusted monitors, positioned instruments, nudged a resident's hand to prevent contamination. Piece by piece, she held the operation together from the shadows. And yet, Pierce's insults kept coming, sharp and public. "You're lucky to even be in this room. Don't overstep." Her silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. She knew storms didn't reveal their fury at once. And tonight's storm was only beginning. For all his bluster, Pierce didn't see the truth written on his own skin. His face was paling, sweat dripped in beads, and his breathing grew ragged. Ava noticed. Her training as a medic kicked in instantly. Something was wrong, not with the patient but with the surgeon himself. She watched closely, her instincts screaming louder than ever. If Pierce faltered, if he collapsed, who would step in? Who would save the man on the table when the supposed genius failed? Ava knew the answer. She had been invisible too long, underestimated too many times. And tonight, the moment was coming when she would no longer have the luxury of silence. The hum of machines filled the operating room, broken only by the sharp beeping of the heart monitor. Each sound seemed louder, harsher, as if it carried the weight of fate itself. Victor Hargrove's life hung by a thread, his body trembling under anesthesia, his vital signs dipping dangerously. All eyes should have been on him. But Ava Johnson's eyes were fixed on Dr. Randall Pierce. The surgeon's movements, once brash and theatrical, had grown unsteady. His shoulders sagged, his breathing quickened. His hands, supposed to be instruments of precision, trembled just slightly, but enough for Ava to notice. Years of battlefield triage had trained her to see the smallest cracks before disaster struck. And Pierce was cracking. Ava's instincts screamed at her to act, but Pierce's voice still commanded the room. Retractor. More suction. He barked the words louder than before, trying to mask the strain in his body. Sweat dripped from his temples, soaking the collar of his scrubs. He pushed forward, refusing to yield, refusing to admit weakness. Pride, more than skill, was guiding his hands now, and pride was a dangerous surgeon. The monitors blared again. Hargrove's blood pressure dipped sharply, his oxygen saturation falling. Panic rippled across the nurses and residents. Ava stepped forward, holding out the correct clamp before Pierce even asked. He slapped it away with an angry glare. I said stay back. You're not leading this surgery, nurse. I am. But then it happened. In a single instant, the arrogance collapsed. Pierce's face went gray, his eyes rolled back, and his body swayed. Before anyone could react, he crumpled forward, crashing against the edge of the operating table. Gasps echoed around the room. Dr. Pierce, shouted a resident, rushing to his side. The chief surgeon, the man everyone believed untouchable, was unconscious. Chaos erupted. What do we do? Someone cried. Get another surgeon in here, shouted another. But Ava knew the truth. Another surgeon wouldn't arrive in time. Not when Hargrove's vitals were already plummeting. The billionaire's heart was losing its rhythm, his life measured in seconds, not minutes. A hush fell over the room, heavy with fear. Nurses looked at each other, frozen. Residents hovered uselessly, their training too shallow for a crisis like this. The aides in the gallery pounded on the glass, shouting for answers. Hargrove's wife screamed, "Save him!" Ava didn't wait. She couldn't. She stepped forward with calm authority, her voice cutting through the panic like a blade. Listen to me. He's crashing. We don't have time to wait. Clamp the vein now, increase fluids to full, and prepare for cardiac support. Her tone was steady, commanding, not a request but an order. The room hesitated. A nurse stammered, "But, you're not." Ava's eyes locked on hers. "I've stabilized more critical patients under fire than any of you will see in your careers. Do exactly as I say or he will die on this table." Something in her voice silenced the room. It wasn't desperation, it was conviction. Even the monitors seemed to sync with her rhythm, the beeping urgent, demanding action. Slowly one nurse obeyed, then another. The team began to move, not under Pierce's chaotic shouting, but under Ava's calm direction. She slipped on sterile gloves, her hands moving with practiced precision. Every gesture was purposeful, efficient. She positioned the instruments, corrected the bleed, adjusted the ventilator. Her body moved like it had in field hospitals years ago, fast, fearless, focused. To the staff around her, it was as if a completely different person had stepped into the room. Up in the gallery, confusion reigned. Hargrove's son turned to the aide. "Who is she? What is she doing?" The aide, pale, shook his head. She's a nurse. "But," She's taking over. The boy leaned closer to the glass, his voice trembling. Then let her. Please just let her. Back inside, Ava barked another command. Charge the defibrillator to 200. Stand by. A nurse hesitated, her hands shaking. But Ava cut her off sharply. Now. The nurse obeyed, startled by the sheer force in Ava's voice. The billionaire's heart monitor flatlined for a second that stretched into eternity. Ava positioned the paddles, her voice low but firm. Clear. The shock jolted Hargrove's body. The line on the monitor flickered, then steadied into a weak but present rhythm. The room exhaled as one. For the first time, hope bloomed. Ava didn't pause to celebrate. Stabilize the rhythm. Keep fluids running. Monitor pressure closely. We're not out of danger yet. She worked tirelessly, guiding the staff with an authority they had never imagined from her. The whispers of doubt began to fade, replaced by awe. On the floor, Dr. Pierce groaned weakly, still unconscious. No one looked at him now. All eyes were on Ava, the nurse they had dismissed, the woman they had overlooked. She was no longer invisible. She was in command. And as the billionaire's vitals steadied, one truth became undeniable. The man everyone had trusted had failed, and the woman they had doubted was the only reason Victor Hargrove was still alive. The silence that followed the first shock was deafening. Every eye in the operating room turned to the monitor as the faint rhythm of Victor Hargrove's heart reappeared. It wasn't strong, not yet, but it was enough to snatch him back from the edge. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Ava Johnson, gloves slick with effort, broke the paralysis. Keep the fluid steady. We need more blood units ready now. Prep adrenaline, 1 milligram for. Her voice was low but resolute, carrying the weight of experience. Not one person dared to argue. The same nurses who had flinched under Dr. Pierce's barking orders now scrambled to obey Ava without hesitation. The residents looked lost, their training insufficient for this chaos, but Ava guided them with a calm precision that cut through the fog. Clamp there. No, not like that. Angle it, secure it. Good. Now suction, keep it clear. Her hands moved faster than her words, demonstrating with flawless technique. Each correction restored order. Slowly, the room transformed from panic to focus, every pair of eyes following her lead. Up in the observation gallery, Hargrove's wife clutched the railing, tears streaming down her face. Who is she? She whispered, staring at Ava with awe. No one had an answer, not one that could capture what was unfolding below. Inside, Ava worked without pause. Every second pulled her deeper into the zone she had once known all too well, the brutal calm of combat medicine. She wasn't in a gleaming hospital anymore. In her mind, she was back in a makeshift tent, bullets cracking in the distance, soldiers bleeding out on dusty stretchers. She could smell the sand, hear the chaos, feel the weight of knowing that one wrong move meant death. Her hands didn't shake. Not then, not now. She tied off the bleed Pierce had ignored, adjusted the ventilator, and gave rapid instructions. One resident stammered nervously, "Ma'am, I don't think I—" Ava cut him off firmly but not unkindly. "Then watch me. Learn. This isn't about what you think, it's about keeping him alive." The young man nodded, his fears softening into respect. He followed her lead, his hands steadier under her guidance. For the first time in his short career, he felt like he was truly saving someone. Then came the voice of doubt, sharp and cutting. From the back of the room, a hospital administrator had slipped in, summoned by the chaos. "What is going on here? Why is a nurse leading this surgery?" His tone dripped with outrage, more concerned with hierarchy than the patient bleeding out on the table. Ava didn't even glance at him. Her focus was unbreakable. "Because your star surgeon is unconscious on the floor, and if I don't lead, your billionaire dies. If you want to stop me, go ahead, but you'll be signing his death certificate." The administrator froze, words caught in his throat. No one else moved to challenge her. Authority wasn't claimed by title now, it radiated from the woman holding a man's life in her hands. Victor Hargrove's vitals flickered again. The heart monitor beeped irregularly. Ava leaned in, scanning the surgical site, then spoke quickly. "He's going into arrhythmia. Get the defibrillator back, charge 250. Epinephrine 1 milligram now. One nurse hesitated, her eyes darting to the administrator. Ava snapped her head around, her gaze sharp as steel. Look at me, not him. Do it now. The nurse jumped into motion, adrenaline surging as she realized Ava wasn't asking, she was commanding. The second shock rattled Hargrove's chest. The flat line gave way to a stuttering rhythm, then slowly, blessedly, the monitor steadied. Weak, yes, but alive. A collective sigh of relief washed over the room. Pressure is stabilizing, a nurse reported. Ava nodded. Good. Maintain. We're not finished. She wiped her brow with her sleeve, her mind racing ahead. Every decision mattered. Every breath she bought him meant another chance to bring him back whole. And through it all, the thought echoed in her mind. This is why I was here. Not for recognition. Not for praise. For moments like this, when someone's arrogance left others to pick up the pieces. For the countless times she had been underestimated, told to stand aside, ignored. This was the moment that proved them all wrong. In the gallery, Hargrove's son leaned forward, his palms pressed against the glass. She's incredible, he whispered almost to himself. His mother nodded through her tears. She's saving him. That woman is saving your father. On the floor, a nurse glanced at Pierce's unconscious body. No one moved to help him. No one seemed to care. The entire room had shifted, gravity pulling toward Ava. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a nurse. She was the leader they needed when everything fell apart. Ava's past replayed in flashes between each command. The dust of the desert, the cries of wounded soldiers, the cold efficiency of life or death choices. She remembered patching up men under mortar fire, improvising with whatever scraps she had. Compared to that, this room with all its machines and resources, was luxury. And yet, the arrogance of people like Pierce had made her fight twice as hard just to be heard. Not tonight. Tonight her voice carried, her hands commanded, and her skill was undeniable. Minutes stretched into eternity, but slowly, under Ava's relentless direction, the chaos gave way to stability. Hargrove's vitals climbed, his breathing steadied, and the bleeding was finally under control. A nurse whispered in disbelief, "He might actually make it." Ava didn't look up. She simply adjusted another line, her voice steady. "He will make it. As long as we don't stop now." And for the first time in that hospital, everyone believed her. The operating room had steadied, but only in appearance. Underneath the hum of machines and the sterile rhythm of orders being followed, a storm still churned. Victor Hargrove's vitals were stable for the moment, but the line between survival and disaster was razor thin. And as Ava Johnson worked tirelessly, guiding hands and correcting mistakes, new obstacles emerged, not medical ones but human ones. From the observation gallery, Hargrove's wife pressed her hand against the glass, her knuckles white. Her voice, muffled but sharp, carried down into the room. "Why is she in charge? Where is the surgeon we hired? This is my husband's life. You can't leave it to a nurse." The words landed like stones. Some of the staff froze, caught between their instinct to trust Ava and the weight of the family's outrage. The administrator, who had been lurking in the corner, seized the moment. "You heard her," he said loudly. "This is irregular. We should wait for another surgeon. This improvisation will not stand." Ava didn't lift her eyes from the clamp she was adjusting. Her voice came calm but edged with steel. "If we wait, your billionaire is dead in 5 minutes. His heart won't hold without intervention. Another surgeon won't arrive in time. Right now, I'm his only chance." The administrator bristled and used to defiance. He opened his mouth to argue again, but one of the junior nurses spoke up, her voice trembling. She's saving him. If she stops, he won't make it." The words hung in the air, undeniable. Still, doubt crept in like poison. Ava could feel the eyes on her, judging, questioning. She thought back to every time she had walked into a hospital room and been mistaken for an aide, Every time her knowledge had been ignored until a man repeated it, every promotion she'd been told she wasn't ready for. She had carried that weight silently for years. Now in this room she carried something far heavier, a life balance between her hands and the prejudice of those who still didn't trust her. Victor's monitor beeped erratically again, the rhythm slipping. Ava's head snapped up. He's destabilizing. Prepare another dose of epinephrine. One nurse hesitated, glancing at the administrator, who still lingered like a shadow of doubt. Ava's eyes cut to her, sharp as glass. Don't look at him. Look at me. Do as I say. The firmness in her tone left no room for argument. The nurse obeyed. She drew up the syringe, handed it over, and Ava administered it with practiced precision. Seconds later, the monitor steadied. A thin cheer rippled through the staff, relief breaking the tension. But Ava didn't allow herself relief. She knew the worst wasn't over. We're holding him, but barely. Prepare for possible cardiac arrest. The administrator scoffed. You're gambling with his life. Finally, Ava's gaze locked on him, unwavering. I'm not gambling. I'm fighting. There's a difference. And if you can't see that, then get out of my oar. The room went silent. No one had ever spoken to him like that. For a long second, he stood frozen, humiliated. Then, with a huff, he turned and stormed out, muttering about consequences. But no one followed him. Every person in the room knew where their trust lay now. In the gallery, Hargrove's son pressed closer to the glass, his eyes locked on Ava. She knows what she's doing, he said firmly, his voice breaking through his mother's panic. Look at her. She's keeping Dad alive. His mother's sobs softened into silence, though her face remained tense with fear. Back at the table, Ava moved like a conductor, orchestrating every hand, every instrument. Her training, honed in the most unforgiving conditions, flowed out of her in an unbroken stream of expertise. Each command was clear, each gesture exact. The staff, once skeptical, now leaned into her authority, their fears slowly replaced by trust. But then, just as a fragile calm began to settle, the monitor screamed again. The line flattened, sharp and merciless. Hargrove's heart had stopped. A collective gasp filled the room. Someone whispered, "He's gone?" Ava's voice cut through like thunder. "He is not gone. Not on my watch. Charged to 300. Now." The team jumped back into motion, adrenaline flooding the room. Ava grabbed the paddles, her eyes blazing with focus. Clear. The shock jolted Hargrove's body violently, but the monitor stayed flat. She didn't falter. Again. Charge 350. Clear. Another shock. Silence. Then faintly a blip. A second blip. The line flickered to life, a weak but steady rhythm returning. The room erupted in gasps of relief, some even whispering prayers of thanks. Ava exhaled slowly, sweat dripping down her temple. Stabilize him. Keep pressure constant. He's fighting, but so are we. For the first time, no one doubted her. Not the staff, not the residents, not even the billionaire's family watching in fear. In the space of minutes, Ava Johnson had gone from an invisible nurse to the undeniable leader of the most critical surgery of the year. But deep inside, Ava knew the battle wasn't over. She had won a round, proved her worth in the face of arrogance and prejudice. Yet the hardest part was still ahead. The patient's heart had been shocked back to life, but keeping it alive would demand every ounce of skill she possessed. And beyond the walls of that room, there would be consequences, political, professional, personal. Still, Ava's voice carried steady as ever as she gave her next command. Let's finish what we started. He's not dying tonight. And everyone believed her. The monitors beeped in steady rhythm again, but Ava Johnson knew better than to relax. Victor Hargrove's life was a fragile flame flickering in a storm, and one strong gust could snuff it out. She could see it in the pale color of his skin, the unstable oxygen levels, the unpredictable waves on the heart monitor. They had pulled him back from the brink twice already, but fate had a way of testing the unshakable. "Keep the fluids consistent," Ava ordered, her tone sharp but steady. "Monitor pressure every 30 seconds. The team obeyed without question now. Gone were the doubtful glances, the hesitation, the second-guessing. Ava had earned every ounce of authority she wielded in that room. But she also felt the weight pressing on her chest. Hours of focus, of unbroken concentration, were catching up with her. Her shoulders ached, her hands were stiff, and sweat clung to her neck under the sterile gown. Still, she stood tall, refusing to let fatigue crack her armor. Then it happened. A sudden, piercing alarm cut through the room. The monitor spiked wildly, then crashed downward. Hargrove's heart wasn't stopping this time, it was twisting into a dangerous, chaotic rhythm. Ventricular fibrillation. A killer if not corrected within seconds. "V-fib," shouted a resident, panic in his voice. "We're losing him again." Ava's mind raced, calculating. Defibrillation was the obvious answer, but his body had already endured multiple shocks. Too much could destroy what fragile rhythm remained. She closed her eyes for half a heartbeat, recalling the harsh lessons of the battlefield, moments when soldiers flatlined, when she had no machines, no labs, just instinct and courage. And she remembered what she had learned. Sometimes survival meant pushing beyond protocols. "Charge to 400, she commanded. Gasps filled the room. A nurse stammered, 400? That's... "Do it," Ava snapped. Her tone cut through doubt like a blade. "It's his only chance." The machine whined as it charged, the sound rising like a scream. Ava positioned the paddles, her hands steady though her heart pounded. She glanced at the team. Clear. The shock hit with a violent jolt, Hargrove's body arching. For a terrifying second, the monitor stayed flat. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, beep. A flicker. Beep. Stronger. The chaotic rhythm gave way to order, weak but stable. A collective exhale swept the room. Some nurses whispered, "Thank God," while one resident slumped against the wall in relief. But Ava didn't let them rest. "He's not out of the woods. Keep him steady. Prepare an infusion of amiodarone, 300 milligrams for now." Her commands flowed effortlessly, and the team moved like a single organism. For the first time they weren't just following, they believed. They trusted. In the gallery, Hargrove's wife had collapsed into a chair, sobbing into her hands. His son leaned forward, whispering to himself, "She saved him. She saved him again." Back at the table, Ava adjusted the instruments with surgical precision. She wasn't a licensed surgeon, but her combat training had prepared her for procedures most residents wouldn't touch. She worked with fearless efficiency, stopping another bleed, securing the airway, ensuring stability. At one point, a young nurse asked in awe, "Where did you learn to do this?" Ava didn't look up. Her voice was quiet, almost distant. "Afghanistan. Iraq. Places no one remembers unless they've bled there." The room went silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. They weren't just watching a nurse. They were watching a soldier, a healer forged in fire. Hours blurred together, each minute a battle. Ava's body screamed for rest, but her will pressed on. She thought of every soldier who had lived because she refused to quit, every patient who had walked out because she pushed beyond limits. Tonight was no different. She wasn't fighting just for Victor Hargrove, she was fighting for every invisible nurse, every underestimated woman, every voice silenced by arrogance. Finally, after what felt like eternity, the monitors steadied into a rhythm that no longer wavered. Blood pressure leveled. Oxygen improved. The surgical field was clean. A nurse whispered, her voice trembling, "He's stable. Truly stable." Another added, "We might be done." Ava exhaled for the first time in hours, her shoulders slumping with quiet relief. She peeled off her gloves, her fingers aching, her body drenched in sweat. Yet her eyes were sharp, unwavering. "Keep monitoring him closely. He'll need round-the-clock care. But yes, he's alive. The room erupted into soft cheers, claps on the back, tears streaming freely. Some nurses hugged each other, residents shook their heads in disbelief. One whispered, "I've never seen anything like it." But Ava didn't smile. Not yet. She glanced at Dr. Pierce, still unconscious on the floor, and felt no satisfaction. The real victory wasn't his failure, it was Hargrove's survival. She turned back to the billionaire on the table, his chest rising and falling, fragile but steady. "You're not done yet," she murmured under her breath. "Not tonight." And in that moment, every person in the room understood. The woman they had dismissed, underestimated, silenced, had not just saved a life. She had rewritten the story of what leadership looked like when the world turned upside down. The sun had already begun to rise when the operating room doors finally swung open. The sterile air carried the heavy scent of sweat, antiseptic, and exhaustion. Victor Hargrove had survived the night. His body, fragile but alive, had been moved to intensive care. 4 hours, Ava Johnson had carried the weight of 300 eyes, nurses, residents, administrators, and the billionaire's desperate family, and against every doubt she had won. But the victory didn't bring her comfort, not yet. She leaned against the wall outside the ICU, her body trembling with fatigue, her mind still replaying every beat, every shock, every command. The battlefield inside her hadn't gone quiet. She knew the fight wasn't over. Hargrove would need days, maybe weeks, of careful monitoring. And there was the other battle, the one waiting in the halls, in the boardrooms, in the headlines. Dr. Randall Pierce, the man who had dismissed her as if she were invisible, was now a patient himself. He had suffered a minor stroke in the middle of surgery and was being evaluated in another wing of the hospital. Rumors swirled among the staff. Some said he'd never operate again. Others whispered about lawsuits, about the media already digging into his past. But what none of them whispered, what none of them could ignore, was the name Ava Johnson. In the waiting area, Hargrove's family gathered. His wife, still pale and shaken, clutched her son's hand. She had been the loudest critic during the operation, demanding a real surgeon takeover, but now she sat in silence, eyes swollen from tears. Her son, however, couldn't stay quiet. As Ava passed by, he stood abruptly. "It was you," he said, his voice raw. The room froze. "You saved him. I saw it, I saw everything from the gallery. You took charge when everyone else panicked. Without you he'd be gone." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Ava. She felt the weight of their stares, the disbelief, the sudden realization that the woman they had barely noticed before had been their lifeline. Ava met the boy's gaze. "I did my duty," she said softly. "That's all." But he shook his head. "No. You did more than duty. You were the only one brave enough to act." His voice cracked and he blinked back tears. "Thank you." For the first time that night, Ava allowed herself a small smile, though her eyes stayed weary. "You don't need to thank me. Thank your father for fighting. I just gave him the chance." The family remained quiet, humbled. Even Hargrove's wife lowered her head, her earlier protests now shameful echoes. She whispered, almost too low to hear, "I was wrong." Word of the night's events spread quickly through the hospital. By morning, whispers had become stories and stories became headlines. Chief surgeon collapses mid-surgery, nurse steps in and saves billionaire. Cameras swarmed outside, reporters hungry for details. Hospital PR scrambled to control the narrative, torn between protecting Pierce's reputation and acknowledging the undeniable truth. Within the staff, a quiet revolution stirred. Nurses who had long felt invisible stood a little taller. Residents who had doubted Ava replayed her every command, realizing they had witnessed mastery no textbook could teach. One nurse whispered to another in the break room, "She didn't just save him, she saved us. She showed what it means to lead." Meanwhile, in his hospital bed, Pierce fumed. His pride, sharper than any scalpel, had been cut open for the world to see. He demanded updates, demanded the hospital restore his reputation. But every demand was met with silence, excuses, or the cold truth. The board had already convened an emergency meeting. Donors were asking questions. And the press had his downfall in their hands. Back in the ICU, Ava checked Hargrove's monitors, adjusting the lines with quiet focus. She didn't seek the cameras, didn't bask in the praise. To her, this wasn't about fame. It was about life. Still, she couldn't ignore the reality. Her world had changed. People were watching her now, really watching, and they would not forget what they saw. Later that evening, as the corridors quieted, a senior doctor approached her. His voice was low, careful. "Ava, I don't know if you realize what you did last night. It's unprecedented. You led a surgery most wouldn't dare, and you succeeded. People will talk. People will challenge it. But they can't erase it." She nodded slowly. "I didn't do it for them. I did it because he needed me." The doctor smiled faintly. "That's why it matters." In the days that followed, the hospital buzzed with change. Journalists requested interviews, colleagues whispered apologies, and the board quietly distanced themselves from Pierce. But for Ava, the true victory was quieter: the grateful glance of a recovering patient, the handshake of a colleague who now saw her differently, the knowledge that she had stood in the fire and hadn't flinched. She had been invisible when the night began. By the morning she was unforgettable. Days turned into weeks, and the story refused to fade. Headlines across the country told it in different ways: nurse saves billionaire when surgeon fails, hidden hero emerges in midnight operation, hospital scandal, arrogance exposed in operating room. Victor Hargrove recovered slowly but surely. His strength returned day by day, each improvement a testament not only to medical science but to the woman who had refused to let him die. By the time he could sit upright, the media frenzy had reached its peak. Cameras camped outside the hospital, desperate for a glimpse of the man who had survived, and of the mysterious nurse who had saved him. Dr. Randall Pierce, meanwhile, faced a very different future. The stroke had left his right hand partially impaired, but worse than the physical damage was the blow to his reputation. The hospital board suspended him indefinitely, pending investigation. Donors and patients withdrew their support. The arrogance that had once made him untouchable now made him a villain in the public eye. For all his boasts of legacy, his career crumbled in weeks. Ava Johnson avoided the cameras, slipping through side entrances, focusing on her patients instead of the spotlight. But she couldn't escape recognition forever. One morning, as she checked Victor's vitals, she found him watching her closely. His voice, still raspy but strong enough, broke the silence. "You saved me," he said simply. Ava shook her head. "You fought. I just gave you the tools to win." He smiled faintly. "Don't be modest. I built my empire by recognizing talent before anyone else. And I know what I saw. You didn't just save me, you led when no one else could. You showed courage when others froze." He paused, his eyes steady. "The world needs to know who you are." Ava hesitated, discomfort flickering across her face. "I didn't do it for recognition." "I know," Victor said softly. "That's why it matters even more." Later that week, the hospital held a press conference. Administrators tried to script the event, to shift blame carefully, but the truth couldn't be contained. Reporters demanded to know who had taken over when Pierce collapsed, who had kept Hargrove alive against impossible odds. And finally, Ava's name was spoken aloud, not as a background nurse, but as the hero of the night. She stood before the cameras, her posture straight, her eyes calm. She spoke not of herself but of teamwork, of the dedication of every nurse and doctor in the room. Yet the world heard the unspoken message, that skill and courage know no rank, no gender, no color. Messages poured in from around the country. Nurses wrote to her saying, "You gave us a voice." Families shared stories of loved ones saved by quiet hands who never got credit. Even young students sent letters inspired by her strength. Victor Hargrove, true to his word, made sure she wouldn't be ignored again. He funded scholarships in her name, created a foundation to support underrepresented voices in medicine, and spoke publicly of the woman who had saved him. As for Dr. Pierce, his downfall was swift and merciless. Former colleagues stepped forward with stories of negligence, of arrogance that had endangered patients before. What had been whispered in hallways became public record. His empire of ego collapsed, leaving only the shadow of what he once was. One evening, as Ava walked home from the hospital, she paused outside and looked up at the city skyline. Lights glittered against the dark, each one a life moving forward, unaware of the battles fought in silence. She thought of the soldiers she'd saved overseas, of the billionaire who had lived because she refused to back down, of every patient who would never know her name but who carried her work inside them. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, to feel the quiet pride she had earned. She hadn't sought this fight, but she hadn't shied away either. And in doing so, she had shown the world a truth too often ignored, that the strongest leaders are not always the loudest, and the greatest heroes are not always the most visible. She whispered to herself, a reminder, a vow, never invisible again. And so, Ava Johnson's story became more than a single night in an operating room. It became a lesson, for every nurse overlooked, for every woman doubted, for every person underestimated. It proved that dignity, skill, and courage shine brightest when tested by fire. Now I want to ask you, have you ever been underestimated only to rise and prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and human strength. Because just like Ava, we all have a moment when the world finally sees us for who we are.